The New Spider-Man in Town, written by Andy Schmidt. Miles Morales is a student at Midtown High School in New York City. He's happy and he has a thirst for knowledge, especially science. He was a young boy just like any other, working hard and doing the right thing, but something soon happened that changed his life for good. While in chemistry class, Miles noted that his good friend, Peter Parker, kept sneaking out of school. Miles grew suspicious, wondering if something was wrong with Peter, if he was okay. So one day, Miles followed Peter and watched as he snuck a mask from his bag. But it wasn't just any mask that Peter was sneaking. It was Spider-Man's mask. Miles couldn't believe it. When Peter was leaving school that afternoon, Miles called to Peter, "Hey Peter, where are you headed?" Peter awkwardly smiled back and said, I've got an assignment for the Daily Bugle. Yeah, I gotta go." Miles didn't believe that either. He followed Peter to a giant lab. Inside the lab, Miles lost track of Peter, and he didn't notice the genetically altered spider slowly spinning a web and dropping down towards him. Yow! The spider bit Miles right on the hand. Miles knocked it off. He knew instantly that this was no ordinary spider bite. Instead of getting sick from the spider bite, Miles soon discovered that it gave him spider powers. "I've got to figure out what this means. What should I do?" He ran home fast. Think, Miles told himself. If Peter really is Spider-Man, then what did he do? Miles searched for articles about Spider-Man. Okay, so you get powers. Check. Then what? You make a costume and go stop bad guys. That seems obvious. With that, Miles created his own Spider-Man costume and leapt into the city. "I can run on walls!" Miles yelled as he scaled the side of a building. He was enjoying discovering his powers, and climbing walls wasn't the only one. Soon, Miles discovered he had an amazing spider sense that warned him of danger. What the heck? Miles couldn't ignore the ringing in his brain. That's when he noticed the burglars running behind him. In an instant, what started off as fun became very scary. Miles had a really big decision to make. Should he run from the danger and stay safe, or should he use his new powers to try and stop these villains? Miles realized that if he was going to call himself Spider-Man, he was going to have to act like Spider-Man. Much to his surprise, Peter Parker, as the original Spider-Man, was already on the case. One of the criminals was getting away, but Miles was able to help. "Hold on, helmet head," he announced. "The only place you're racing off to is prison." Miles had powers to match Peter's and was easily able to contain the thief. It wasn't until the action was over that Miles realized just how much danger he was really in. He climbed to the top of a building and wanted to fade away, which is exactly what he did. This was a brand new power, one that Peter didn't have. He camouflaged himself into his surroundings. Peter Parker swung up to where Miles had been. "Miles, is that you?" Peter called out. "I recognized your voice. Believe it or not, I know what you're thinking. I went through the same thing when I first got my powers." Miles was stunned. "You did?" "Sure I did," Peter said. "My Uncle Ben used to tell me that with great power, there must also come great responsibility." Peter tossed Miles something from his costume. "Here, you can have these extra web shooters for now," said Peter. "Whoa, cool," Miles said, while testing out the web shooters. Miles looked up to Peter, figuring out what he should do. "Maybe I can follow you around for a few days, see how it goes?" "I think that's a good idea, but you can't go around calling yourself Spider-Man, Miles. That name's taken." "Oh, I'm definitely Spider-Man," Miles said, smiling. The two swung off together to patrol the friendly neighborhood. It wasn't long before Peter got them into quite a pickle, surrounded by some of the nastiest villains in New York City. And that's when Miles knew he was born for this. The battle roared while Peter kept poking fun at the rampaging villains. Miles was terrified. "How do you keep joking in the middle of a fight?" he asked Peter. "Aren't you scared?" That's when the rhino grabbed Peter by the neck. Peter couldn't let out another word, funny or otherwise. Miles turned and let loose his newest and last power. Another power that Peter didn't have at all. Miles would later call it the Venom Strike, and it put Rhino down for the count. Peter was safe. Miles and Peter wrapped the baddies up in maybe a little more than the usual amount of sticky stuff. Peter said, "Come on, if you're not going to change your name, you've got to learn how to crack jokes. It's part of the job. Give it a try." Miles scratched his head, thinking while looking down at the webbed-up villains. Then he said, "Looks like you've got yourselves into a sticky situation, evildoers." Peter sighed. "Wow, somebody call the doctor. You have no funny bone." The end. I hope you enjoyed that story. Until next time, happy reading.